When most people think about cyber attacks, they imagine something obvious: a website going down, a system crashing, or a ransom note suddenly appearing on a screen. But the most consequential cyber attacks in history rarely look like that. They unfold slowly, quietly, and almost invisibly, often over the course of years. Operation Shady RAT was one of those attacks. It was not a single breach or a single dramatic incident. It was a long-running cyber espionage campaign that operated in the background for years, quietly siphoning sensitive information from some of the most powerful organizations in the world while almost nobody noticed it was happening. To understand why Operation Shady RAT matters so much and why it is still relevant today, we need to understand the environment in which it emerged, how it operated, and what it ultimately revealed about modern power and cyber warfare. In the early to mid 2000s, the internet was becoming central to how governments and corporations functioned. Sensitive communications moved to email, defense contractors stored designs and research on internal servers, energy companies relied on digital infrastructure to manage exploration data and operations, convenience and connectivity were prioritized far more than security. At that time, cybersecurity as a discipline was still developing. Most organizations focused on keeping attackers out, but very few had the ability to detect what happened once someone got inside. Internal monitoring was weak, logging was inconsistent, and long-term threat detection was rare. This was the perfect environment for a campaign like Operation Shady RAT to begin. The earliest known Shady RAT intrusions date back to at least 2006 and possibly earlier. The attackers did not rely on groundbreaking exploits or advanced techniques. Instead, they used simple, reliable methods that worked well against the security posture of the time. Initial access was often gained through spear phishing emails containing malicious attachments. These attachments typically exploited known vulnerabilities in common software such as Adobe Reader or Microsoft Office. By modern standards, many of these emails were unimpressive. Some were poorly written with awkward grammar or unnatural phrasing, others looked generic or unpolished. But that didn't matter. Employees were not trained to be suspicious of emails, and opening attachments from colleagues or internal-looking messages was routine. The attackers understood that they didn't need every email to work. They only needed one person to click. And over time, that always happened. Once a single machine inside an organization was compromised, the attackers deployed remote access tools or RATs, which gave them persistent control over the system. From there, they moved slowly and deliberately. They explored the internal network, identified key systems, harvested credentials, and escalated privileges, all while avoiding actions that might trigger suspicion. What defined Operation Shady RAT was patience. Instead of stealing everything at once, data was exfiltrated gradually, often in small chunks, blended into normal network traffic. In many cases, attackers remained inside victim networks for months or even years without being detected. Later forensic investigations revealed intrusions that lasted more than 2 years and in some cases more than 4. The scale of Operation Shady RAT only became visible in 2011 when McAfee published a report detailing the campaign. According to their findings, more than 70 organizations across 14 countries had been compromised. The victims were not random. They included government agencies, defense contractors, energy companies, technology firms, and international institutions. Among the most sensitive targets were the United Nations and other organizations involved in global diplomacy. These intrusions potentially exposed internal communications related to negotiations, sanctions, and geopolitical strategy. Another notable victim was the International Olympic Committee, which was compromised prior to the 2008 Beijing Olympics. The timing raised serious questions about intelligence gathering related to event security, international coordination, and political optics. Operation Shady RAT was not about disruption. It was about visibility and insight. One of the most unsettling aspects of the campaign was the breadth of its targeting. In addition to obvious strategic targets, attackers also compromised universities, research institutions, think tanks, and non-governmental organizations. These entities often acted as secondary sources of intelligence, holding research, policy discussions, and informal communications that could just be as valuable as classified material. This indicated that the goal was not just immediate advantage, but long-term strategic understanding. At this point, researchers strongly suspected that Shady RAT was state-sponsored, but no one had publicly named the actor behind it. That would come later. As more intrusions were investigated, security firms began noticing recurring patterns. The same malware families appeared across unrelated victims, command and control infrastructure shared similar characteristics, domain registration habits repeated themselves, operational behavior was consistent across years. These connections gradually linked Operation Shady RAT to a broader set of intrusions that became known collectively as Advanced Persistent Threat Activity. One group stood out above the rest. In 2013, cybersecurity firm Mandiant released a report that changed the field forever. The report identified a specific threat group known as APT-1 and tied it directly to China's People's Liberation Army, specifically Unit 61398 based in Shanghai. The significance of the report was not just the accusation but the evidence. Mandiant analyzed years of intrusion data, malware samples, network traffic, and attacker behavior. They documented hundreds of command and control servers, thousands of malicious domains, and consistent operational schedules that aligned with business hours in China. Malware artifacts often contain simplified Chinese language markers. Infrastructure repeatedly traced back to the same networks. Individually, these indicators might have been dismissed. Together, they formed a compelling case. According to Mandiant, APT-1 had compromised at least 141 organizations across 20 major industries. The majority of these victims were located in the United States, with others spread across Europe and Asia. The targeted industries aligned closely with China's economic and strategic priorities, including aerospace, defense, energy, telecommunications, manufacturing, and software. The primary objective was intellectual property theft. APT-1 stole source code, product designs, manufacturing processes, internal emails, and strategic plans. In some cases, the volume of data exfiltrated from a single organization reached thousands of terabytes. Much of this information later appeared to benefit Chinese state-owned enterprises competing in the same sectors. APT-1's operational style closely mirrored what had been observed during Operation Shady RAT: initial access through phishing, long-term persistence, careful lateral movement, and a heavy focus on email systems, particularly Microsoft Exchange servers. By accessing email archives, attackers gained insight not just into data, but into how organizations thought, planned, and responded to incidents. The average APT-1 intrusion lasted nearly a year, but many lasted far longer. Again, patience was the weapon. Some victims eventually went public. Major US corporations disclosed breaches involving the theft of sensitive trade secrets. Energy companies lost proprietary exploration data. Technology firms discovered that years of research and development had quietly walked out the door. Media organizations were also targeted. The Associated Press revealed that attackers had accessed internal journalist emails related to investigations into Chinese political leadership. This was not random surveillance. It was targeted intelligence collection. When the Mandiant report was released, the global response was immediate. For the first time, a private cybersecurity firm had publicly accused a foreign military unit of systematic cyber espionage and backed it with detailed technical evidence. China denied the allegations, calling them politically motivated and unfounded. But the conversation had already changed. Cyber espionage was no longer hypothetical, it was documented. In 2014, the United States took an unprecedented step by including 5 officers of the PLA Unit 61398 on charges of counter hacking and economic espionage. The indictment accused them of stealing trade secrets from US companies over nearly a decade and sharing that information with Chinese state-owned enterprises. The officers never appeared in court and the indictments were largely symbolic, but symbolically they mattered. They marked the moment when cyber operations became a visual part of international law, diplomacy, and conflict. Today, Operation Shady RAT is studied not because it was the most technically advanced campaign, but because it demonstrated a new model of power. It showed that long-term access is often more valuable than immediate destruction, and that intelligence gathered quietly over years can outweigh any single dramatic attack. In many ways, Shady RAT was a prototype. The technique it popularized are still used today by APT groups around the world. While tools and infrastructure have evolved, the core strategy remains the same. Get inside, stay invisible, learn everything. Operation Shady RAT did not end when it was exposed. It faded into the background as cyber espionage became normalized. What once shocked the cybersecurity world is now considered an expected part of the global threat landscape. And that may be the most unsettling legacy of all. Because every operation we know about, there are likely others still running quietly right now inside networks that believe they are secure. Operation Shady RAT was not the beginning of cyber espionage, and it was not the end. But it was the moment the world was forced to acknowledge that cyberspace had become a permanent battlefield, one where power is measured not just in weapons or armies, but in information, patience, and time. And once that reality became clear, there was no going back.
And remember, kids, the next time that somebody tells you the government wouldn't do that, oh yes they would.